Hello and welcome to Ways Women Lead, the podcast where remarkable female leaders share their personal journeys and offer valuable guidance on advancing your career as a woman in leadership. Join host Anna Gromadska and her guests as they delve into various aspects of leadership, including diversity, equity, and inclusion. This podcast is brought to you by Six Group, a global executive search and leadership advisory firm.
Rachael, welcome to Ways Women Lead. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So you have had a fantastic career with over 20 years experience in R&D, product development, portfolio management, working for leading FMCG, medical devices and pharmaceutical businesses, including Reckitt, Bayer, Abbott. Your passion lies in building high-performing agile teams while driving innovation and faster time to market. This is what you have been focusing on for many of those years. So I'm really excited to delve a little bit deeper into that and hear some of your learnings, advice, some of specific stories to set the context. I'm really interested to hear, what is your leadership journey?
Well, for me, when I think about my career, it's really about being the pursuit of personal growth and adaptation. So over the years, I've been really fortunate to work alongside some remarkable leaders who have been able to learn from, and they've really influenced my philosophy on leadership. I know that early in my career, I really held in high esteem the real direct and action-orientated leaders. I really admired that, and I could really see the effectiveness of that approach, especially in a fast-changing environment. However, while I still value these attributes, I think as I have matured in my career, I've been exposed to more different situations, contact with different kinds of challenges, more the impact of leading with empathy, and particularly in a really dynamic, changing environment where there's a lot of complex situations and a lot of change. I think leading with empathy, I've really seen a more nuanced approach to leadership, and I've seen that be highly effective and motivating across organizations and teams.
Why do you think it's crucial to lead with empathy, and how does it impact organizations positively?
Yeah, I mean, my personal experience is that it really shines, is really effective in periods of uncertainty and change. And I think that is really common now in a dynamic work environment. Everyone is facing constant change. We're constantly changing. And I think that you can see with that empathic leadership style that leaders who genuinely care about the team members, they take the time to understand their employees' motivations. They actively listen. They want to create an atmosphere of trust within their organisation and their teams. I really feel that's really motivating as an employee and for teams. And that if you've got to have a leader that's invested in personal growth of their employees, and want them to perform at their best and are willing to listen and identify how to support them, this is really reciprocal. And I think you have an organisation of employees and team members who really want to give back as well. So it's a symbiotic relationship. And I think this really drives organisational success and fosters really that shared vision.
And you mentioned earlier that when you started your leadership journey, you focused more on this direct and action-oriented leadership. That's the leadership type that you encountered more. And in our previous conversations, you also said that you still deem this leadership style, effective. I believe probably, I guess, in certain situations, right? It depends on the situation.
It's situational. Leadership needs to be situational. So it's knowing when to step in and when to step back, and understanding what the team needs in that moment. In crisis situations, that may be when you need to step in with a more directorial leadership style and set the direction and and make decisions quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But in most instances, we're not in crisis situations, and
Mm-hmm.
that allows you to flex, obviously, leadership styles, and
Mm-hmm.
allows the time really for your team to come up with the solutions and give them that space to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I really do think that directorial leadership really comes into its own in a crisis, when decisions need to be made quickly or the team are lost and need direction.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really important to take a step back and to use that, to not flex immediately to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you really need to allow the time to ensure that their voices are heard, that you're fostering a sense of ownership and collaboration first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if you can foster that trust and collaboration, you can get to a position where you can ask your team, what do you need from me? And I think that's always a good starting point. What do you need from me?
Mm-hmm.
And if you've built that trustful collaboration, team members can say, I need you to make the decision. Or they can
Mm-hmm.
say, I need help to talk
Mm-hmm.
through this and I need a
Mm-hmm.
sounding board. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's understanding that. But I think the temptation to step in, you have to deny that temptation to step in and actually understand when it's appropriate and not, and to ask the right question.
You said something very important, because you have built that trust earlier. The
Mm-hmm.
team members feel comfortable telling you what they need, right? If
Yes,
we talk a lot about psychological safety,
yes,
because of the work that we are conducting for a lot of organizations we're working with, and this is very good example of that, where that psychological safety really pays off in terms of helping you to be more effective leader. You've built psychological safety, you've built the trust, and so when the situation is difficult, your team members don't feel fear for telling you frankly what do they need.
exactly. I
Uh-huh.
think you've managed to foster that open dialogue.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
People feel much more comfortable for asking for help when they need help,
Mhm.
but also for saying, actually, I have this, but this is where you might help me. So building that psychological safety is really important as a leader,
Mhm.
to really get the best out of any situation and your team members and yourself.
I always do like to ask about a specific situation. Can you think of a specific example when you had to pivot, from one leadership style to another?
I think an example early in my career, I came into a role. I was leading a team, and in the first few weeks of moving into this leadership position, we had a project that basically went completely off the rails. We had a massive project failure, and I think in this situation, I would normally have the answers or the solutions, at least in my head,
Mhm.
about what we needed to do. But in this instance, it was new. It was a new team. It was a new technology to me. This is when I realized the power of pivoting and not
Mhm.
necessarily having a directorial leadership, where I could actually go to the team with a little bit of humility and vulnerability and frame the challenge, be quite honest and say, I really need your support to find the answers here.
Mhm.
And what do you think is the best course forward? And I think it really flipped in the room, because they'd expected me to come into the room and say, this is the plan. This is how
Mhm.
we're going to deal with it. But actually
Mhm.
flipping it back on the team and saying,
Mhm.
actually, I need your help to find the plan. And it really opened the dialogue, and we, brainstorm creative solutions. Nobody felt uncomfortable to suggest things that they might have thought
Mhm.
were ridiculous.
Mhm.
And we came up with a creative solution which helped us to actually bring the project back on track,
Mhm.
and communicate that really
Mhm.
effectively in the organisation. And it really fostered a really strong team spirit. And actually,
Mhm.
through that exercise, it actually built trust and, built psychological safety. But it did mean that I had to be a little bit vulnerable,
Mhm.
and expose myself, which at that time is a little bit uncomfortable as a leader, to go
Mhm.
and say, actually, I don't know the answers to this. I need your help. But actually, it made me realize a powerful aspect to leadership. It's not about having the answers yourself. It's about fostering an environment where you get the best from your team and allow them to find the solutions.
And I understand from that experience, you've really seen in practice that this works, and you've been replicating that
Mhm.
throughout your
Mhm.
career. It's really interesting to hear, because there's so much talk now about psychological safety and
Yeah.
vulnerability, but historically, showing vulnerability, at least in the mind of a leader, quite often
Yes,
was this concept that vulnerability is a weakness.
exactly.
And many leaders, no matter what happens, the last thing they wanted to do or to show is that they don't have the answer, or they don't know what to do. And they've been struggling. I've been reading a lot about it recently. We've been discussing a lot about it with our clients, and leaders ask for advice. How can I do that? How can I show vulnerability, in small steps,
Yes.
in a way that it doesn't, undermine, my position as a leader, that people
Mhm.
still trust me, that I can lead them,
Yeah.
lead the team towards better results, while at the same time showing that
Yeah.
there are things I don't have an answer to.
Exactly. And I think some of I say, the historical leadership
Mm.
styles I saw earlier in my career were very much directorial. They were very much, I know everything, I know the path forward, follow me, this is the way to do things. And you saw these strong leaders who seemed infallible. But I have been really lucky in my career to be exposed to different types of leadership,
Mhm.
and senior female leaders in organizations who had very different leadership styles. And I think that was probably when I was exposed initially to first that, yeah, I guess I'm more humble, I'm more
Mhm.
empathetic leadership style with
Mhm.
a little bit humility. I've personally experienced that when I've seen that shown by a leader to be really powerful, and
Mhm.
really appreciated that leadership style. So it showed me that there were different ways to lead,
Mhm.
and that there isn't one style fits all. And I was lucky to be exposed to that earlier in my career. I mean, some excellent female leaders I was exposed to. I think one powerful situation was where we were having poor business results. It was a challenging business situation. We'd had some setbacks on projects, some difficult decisions had been made, and morale was quite low. And actually, this leader took her leadership team into a role, and actually was vulnerable, and actually set out the challenges that we faced. And through that vulnerability and that humility, open the dialogue for us as a
Mhm.
leadership team to be creative, to have open discussions, to talk about what we felt hadn't gone well and how we could address that, to talk about where we needed support from one another, or where we perhaps felt things had not gone well, or we'd not performed well as a team. And I think that's opportunity self-reflection allowed us to really feel re-energized as a team,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
set a clear direction, and to have a path forward that we felt confident about. So from a point of actually feeling quite demoralized, it's not a good situation, to come out then with a clear path forward, to identifying the way forward, feeling energized as a team and supported by your colleagues. It was a real powerful meeting, and that was my first exposure to it, how
Mhm.
actually leading with humility and a little bit of vulnerability can
Mhm. Mhm.
really bring out the best of a team.
It's amazing to hear that so many examples from your experience showing that it works. It really works, because I think it can be very counterintuitive for many people who are used to this more traditional leadership style, as we said
Yeah.
earlier. So when we talked earlier, you mentioned to me that there were many powerful leaders who have inspired you to lead that way.
Mhm.
and that you've learned few strategies and habits from them that allowed you to, embrace a similar leadership style. And thanks to that, to be a more effective leader. Do you have some advice for other people who are learning to be leaders and who really want to adopt similar leadership style, maybe on, simple habits, simple
Yeah.
strategies that they can start applying today that won't be too scary, because as you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, it can sound scary being vulnerable.
The thing that has most helped me in my career
Mhm.
has been feedback. Asking for
Mhm.
feedback,
Mhm.
seeking feedback, encouraging people to give you feedback, whether that's your peers, your boss. You normally get feedback from your boss, but asking your peers for feedback and asking your team, people who report to you for feedback. I've actually found the most powerful feedback to be from my own team members. And that again relies psychological safety and trust, because
Mhm.
you're in a more powerful position than your direct reports. So asking them for feedback and getting the gift of feedback from them can be really,
Mhm.
really powerful for you and your own personal
Mhm.
professional development. I think encouraging that feedback culture is really imperative to a successful organization, successful team, and also a successful professional career.
So you make it sound very easy. Have you had, situations where you've received feedback that you disagreed with, or
Oh,
weren't so,
I think,
or weren't so,
yeah,
happy about, or maybe?
feedback can always be uncomfortable.
Uh
Feedback's
huh.
difficult. It can be
Uh
difficult
huh.
to give as well as to
Yeah.
take, because
Yeah.
you might not agree with it, or the person that you're giving feedback to, you may not agree with it. I mean, I think it's always important when you give feedback to say, "This is what I observe. This is
Mhm.
my understanding of the situation." So really depersonalize it in that way. I think it can be challenging, and that's why it's important to practice it, because
Mhm.
that way it becomes easier and it becomes more routine and everyday. And
Mhm.
feedback is not always negative. It should be positive as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, telling people what they're great at or what they did well in is really motivating. If someone said to
Mhm.
you, "I really like how you picked up that point in the meeting and re-emphasized it," you're like, "Oh, thanks." And it tells you
Mhm.
what to do more of. So feedback shouldn't be something to be feared. It should be something to
Mhm.
enjoy. And certainly, being able to tell people, "Hey, in that meeting, I thought you handled that situation really well. They were tough questions and you really knew your stuff, and you really gave some very perceptive answers there," or "You managed to control that meeting and keep us on track well." They can be just small things, or they can be much more significant. But once you get into the habit of giving people feedback, and practice giving the positive feedback is a little bit is a nice soft way of getting into the habit of actually giving
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah.
Because then you're not always thinking of feedback as to be a negative flex. It's actually
Yeah.
could be a very positive flex, where you're actually calling out really good behavior, really good approach, really good thinking, or styles of work.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I had a guest in one of the previous episodes, Emmy Marietta, who talks a lot about imposter syndrome. And she did say that what's important is giving feedback. Actually, this can really, really help to get rid of that imposter syndrome, and help people understand that yes, they do deserve this role.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very important, the positive feedback. Also, the fact that you ask for feedback as a leader helps your team to feel more comfortable receiving this feedback as well. Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's just about making it part of everyday work. So,
Yeah.
for example, it can be as simple as you can make it fun. So, like, if you have a meeting with your team, it's like, "Okay, let's score how effective this meeting would be. One thing that you really liked about this
Mhm.
meeting, one thing that you think you can improve on." And
Mhm.
it's like a no blame, it's fun, it's
Mhm.
light-hearted. And you can write something quite
Mhm.
trivial down, like, "Oh, I like that we all had coffee together," or
Mhm.
"The meeting overran." It's still
Mhm.
feedback. You know that actually we need to be more timely and not allow things to overrun. But it's about flexing it and making it part of everyday work environment where feedback is not seen as a big thing or a negative thing. It's part of everyday business. And I completely agree about the imposter syndrome. I think giving people feedback in the moment, it really helps people's confidence. It really allows them to know what they're doing right, so that they can flex that even more. And they're like, it shows that you are actually invested in that person and that you care about them to some degree. Into their professional development and success. I think that's really motivating and gives you a sense of togetherness and a cohesiveness in an organization.
Yeah, and in the end, this is your role as a leader to ensure that people who report to you, they have that guidance in terms of what they're doing right and where they can improve. So I wanted to ask you, going back to your professional journey. So your background is academia, and then you moved to the industry. And I believe you've had some interesting challenges and learnings, right? It's two different environments. So what have been the biggest challenges and learnings from that transition?
I think moving from academia to industry was a big, as it was like a transformative moment for me in terms of my approach. So it required a shift of emphasis for me. So in academia, a lot of emphasis on written reports and detail and methodologies and results. And really the communication style is more written. There is some lectures, but it's more lecturing at and a sharing of fact and information. And when I moved into business, I vividly remember like one of my first presentations where I applied the tools that I'd learned in academia, and I really cringe at my first early attempts in that they weren't interesting. There was my presentations were too detailed. They didn't have clear conclusions or allow a decision to be taken to progress. And talking about feedback, actually, at the time, a female leader actually spoke to me and gave me feedback and said, "How do you think that went well?" And basically says, "How did I think it went?" And I reflect. It allowed me an opportunity to reflect and I think I lost people's attention. And it allowed me then to, change my style and realize that I needed to flex and have a different presentation style. And it was more around being engaging, being persuasive, tailoring my presentation to the decisions that needed to be made, sharing the information that was only pertinent to the decision making. So it really was an opportunity where I learned the importance of effective communication and also storytelling, the importance of storytelling in a corporate environment.
Do you have any advice for effective storytelling? Any technique that you use that helps you?
Well, there's the hero's journey, which is a technique, but I personally, if I've got a story to tell, I would try it out. Ask someone and say, "This is my story. Is it simple? Is it clear?" And get feedback. I'm a big advocate for feedback. If I have a story, is it interesting and compelling? Do you get the key messages from it? But it's always worthwhile sharing with someone else. Sharing with someone and getting their feedback. Someone will be honest, and give you that honest feedback. Yeah. So
what's the hero's journey? Is that the 3 steps when you put the context, the problem, and then how you solve it?
It's a nice circular story where you talk about the situation, the challenges to overcome, the setbacks that you then had, and then eventually you result as a hero. I think one of the examples that's used in training is they use Star Wars. as an example for the hero's journey.
Uh-huh.
So, but there can be a lot more detail to it. I
Yeah.
recommend you look up the hero's journey, so you can really build a
Yeah.
compelling story case.
Yes,
But
yes,
yes,
we've
there is attention to it. It's how to add tension and excitement through the story, so you keep the listener entertained.
uh, yes, I knew it. I didn't realize this is what it was called. I love the title. It makes sense. You said the context, obviously, so the listener knows what's going on, and then you talk about the challenges and setbacks. So there's a little bit of drama, a little bit of emotion.
Exactly.
And then you talk about the
I-
solution you've implemented, so it lifts the whole story up and
exactly. Yeah.
leaves the happy ending. So it kind of plays on emotions as well, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay, focusing a little bit more on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. What's your story with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging?
My passion for DI grew as I took over responsibility for developing, uh, graduate programs, leadership programs, and DI initiatives across organizations and teams. And I realized that the need for a more inclusive approach to really mature it. I think early on in my career, I attended DI leadership programs where there were no female representations on the panel. And then when I started to lead these initiatives, I really wanted to address that and introduce a more diverse panel so that we had a much more representative feedback to help with people's leadership development. I think as well, what I really think is important is when you're leading any DI initiative, is that you must listen to the underrepresented voices in your organization to be truly inclusive. And I think for more mature programs, you really want to have a more localized and tailored approach to DEI. So you're addressing specific concerns alongside, the standard trainings and programs that are rolled out across organizations. I've seen tremendous benefit for having localized approaches, which involves the local team or local function, where they identify what concerns they have locally and identify trainings or approach or how they want to manage that. And I think I've seen that really drive engagement and participation in DI initiatives and really have a much stronger impact on the overall program by allowing that. It fosters inclusiveness, it fosters proactiveness, fosters self-awareness and organizational awareness, and it ultimately increases engagement.
Do you have maybe a couple of examples? Does anything stand out to you in terms of specific DEI initiatives that you saw working particularly well, or maybe that you think organizations should do more of, that there's not enough of them?
As I said, there's some great standardized programs, but I've seen some great localized programs as well, where local teams have come up with their own poster initiatives and their own talking groups, where they talked around a particular topic on DI that they felt were really impacting their team, such as trust or inclusiveness, and were able to facilitate open discussion around that and the impact that was having on their work and how they felt having a more inclusive or trusting team or group would really help their performance. And I think that allowing teams to identify what it is, it might be a poster, it might be a symposium, it might be a talking, a lunchtime working chat, but allowing teams to lead those and to drive those, I think really drives participation and allows challenges to be discussed in a more open manner that are affecting their group. such as, I've seen some great initiatives on disabilities and hidden disabilities that were not discussed, and were able to be discussed much more openly, and, actions taken in result of those conversations.
And again, when it comes to DEI, it's really important. Going back to the beginning of our conversation, it'll only work, these conversations will only work if you have already built that environment of trust and psychological safety. Because a lot of the time, you are asking people who are in minority to put themselves out there and talk about things that are not comfortable. So again, without that psychological safety and trust within the organization, you won't be able to drive effective DEI initiatives because people just won't feel comfortable talking about what's needed.
Yeah, and I think that's why DI, when you can localize it to some degree, can be very effective, because you're allowing people to talk about it with their immediate team in their local area, rather than a large corporate forum. It's quite imposing to go on a webcast or a large corporate forum and say, oh, how are you addressing menopause? Whereas perhaps in a local team, people would feel much more comfortable talking about menopause or other topics. And there's that trust and that empathy, and that support in place that you've built. That open dialogue can take place, and then that can actually inform then corporate policies, because it's come from grassroots, and it's at all levels through the organisation, versus top down. It's actually coming up from your employees through all levels.
Yeah, and I guess you feel more comfortable talking about it with people who you directly work with, right? Who you
Yes.
know and have
Yes.
known. Yeah, because
Yeah.
through this
Been my
conversation.
observation. That's been my
Yeah.
observation. And, we've seen topics, having led DII programs across organisations, actually, when we've allowed these local DI groups to discuss topics locally, what has come back as not being more from top down. So I've really encouraged that, because it really allows local topics to bubble, and they're very very diverse. Very diverse. So topics that might come up from a site in India or South America might be very different to topics that you perhaps might rise in a site in France or in the UK. And I think especially in global businesses, some topics are very difficult to talk about in some regions, due to laws, local regulations, and obviously different beliefs and values. So it's really important that you foster an open dialogue, but it's through compassion, empathy, and understanding. We're all in different situations, and our perspectives and are maybe very different. But it's about being respectful in those conversations, and showing respect for one another and each other's values and opinions.
Precisely. So to finish our conversation, I'll ask you a final question. Having experienced this fantastic career, which I feel we only scratched the surface of, but we got some useful advice. But what is the advice they would give to your younger self, embarking on a journey again of progressing through
Yeah.
roles of increased responsibilities, wanting to become a leader of various teams and make an impact and drive a positive change, but also be effective, right? And have a positive commercial impact as well as impact on
Yeah.
culture.
That's a really good question. What would I advise my younger self? We've already touched about feedback. We've talked about feedback throughout this call. Feedback, definitely learn to feel comfortable giving it, learn to feel comfortable accepting it as well. Seek it, make it part of your leadership style and how you work with your colleagues and peers and team. I think the second thing is back yourself. You do have to back yourself, and to identify ways that perhaps can help build your own confidence so you feel more comfortable asserting yourself and backing yourself. Talked about the imposter syndrome. What can I do that will make me feel comfortable to really, what can I do to make myself feel comfortable and back myself? And I think surround yourself with people who are supportive, who also believe in you. That can be really helpful. Being surrounded by people who actually have your best interests at heart and believe in you can be really motivating. My other advice was seek out a coach and mentor. One of the things that we've not talked about, but one of the things that perhaps women haven't historically, well, should I say, one of the things that I think I would recommend myself to do is to seek out a mentor or a coach and network with other women and network across organisations. I think that is something that is perhaps not given as much priority to. I think I know essentially myself, I focused on doing a good job and doing the best job I could do. But you do need to network and to network and to seek out those leadership roles.
Thank you very much. It's been a very, very interesting and useful conversation. I've really loved all the insights. I really love how really nicely it's been seen in practice, how vulnerability and building trust works to make leadership effective. Thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Okay, thank you. It's been lovely speaking to you today.
That's it for this month's Ways Women Lead episode. But there is plenty more insightful and actionable advice from where this podcast came from. Check out our website on www.six-group.com if you'd like to know more about how to build and develop diverse, inclusive, and effective leadership teams, and how to progress your career as a leader. See you next time.